Hello, viewers, and welcome to yet another exciting edition of the Liberian History Channel. My name is Dennis Jai, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. In tonight's edition of the Liberian History Channel, we're going to be looking at part 5 of the birth of the African Republic, that's Liberia. And in that, we're going to be looking at independence and the struggle for sovereignty. Your presenter is Dennis Jai, and of course, we have historian and public policy guru, Carl Famule. Carl, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
It's good to be here. Thanks so much, Dennis.
And welcome, Carl, to this another Saturday of the Liberian History Channel. I see the people are excited about the show, and we are glad to be here. Welcome again. And how is it there at your end?
It's good. It's been a quiet Saturday, rainy. You know how it is, spring, but very nice and quiet.
We've been doing this for a couple of Saturdays now, and I'm excited to say that the feedback is good, and we should continue to do this. So last week we were talking about that was part 4, and we spoke about the laws. Laws that people make at the very beginning, they are very important. And for the first time, I really come to read some of those laws and know about them. So that was an eye-opener for me, and it was for a lot of people. Today, we're going to be talking about Liberia now. The country started getting independence and the struggle it has to go through to keep its feet steady as a sovereign nation. That's what we're going to be discussing today. And by the way, we are live now on Prime FM, not this show now, but Focus on Liberia. We are live on Prime FM 105.5 3 times a week, and we're going to be continuing that. And that costs money. So if you want to support us, please get in contact so that we can keep this on the radio so that people in Liberia can also hear the History Channel. We need it. We need history. We need history. Carl, 2 things I always remember about history is history is not about feeling good. It's not about how we feel, but actually it's what happens. That is very profound. I want you to explain that a little more to our viewers.
Yeah, so history, we're living the consequences of history, whether we know history or not. So history is everything that occurred to cause the world to be organized as it is. It explains how we became, who and what we are. And it is one of those things, like gravity. It affects you if you're aware of what it is or not. And it just is what it is. So the beauty of it is understanding how we got to our present condition, and how if we need to correct things, you understand how the problem evolved. And also for me, being a student of African world history, specifically West Africa, Caribbean, North and South America, the transatlantic slave trade, I have gotten such a sense of pride and self-determination, respect for people that came before us and made today possible, made the opportunities that we still have possible. So history can also be a sense of pride. It helps you formulate your identity, your self-esteem, depending on depending on who is telling the story and from what perspective. Sometimes we are educated to see the world through other people's eyes and not through our own. And so what I try to bring to these narratives is a perspective from the position of being an African woman, a Liberian woman. I like to see the world through my own eyes and from my own perspective. So it's not really a different history. It is established history. But the difference is I focus more on us and not the Europeans. So the emphasis is us and our people and our heritage.
Right. And who is best to tell your story besides yourself?
Right.
So I like the idea that you are saying this or telling this story from our perspective as Liberian people, Liberian men, Liberian women. Today, we're going to be talking about the country now and independence, and we're going to go through a slide. But before we start, I want us to take a few minutes to discuss the concept of independence. anytime you talk about Liberia being independence, the first question is independence from home. So, what is independence, and what are some of those conditions that need to be satisfied before you gain your independence?
So independence is essentially sovereignty, right? Sovereignty means that you're a self-determinant country. It means that you have boundaries, meaning land, you have laws, and you must also be recognized by other states as a nation. And so they, you must have treaties and be able to interact with other countries as a sovereign. So that did not occur for us until 1847. So Liberia is not actually 200 years old. We're 175 years old. So this year makes our country 175 years old.
The concept of colonialism, imperialism, or conquest, I think if those things did not exist, will we be talking about independence?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Because countries were colonized, countries were being ruled by other people, by other powers.
Mm-hmm.
If those things did not exist, we wouldn't be talking about independence, right?
Well, okay, so when we talk about independence, we talk about asserting sovereignty.
Okay.
Ethiopia was never colonized, and so Ethiopia is a nation, and it's a country, and it is recognized. It falls into those rules. So you can be a country and not have had to have been born of a struggle to release or free yourself from another state. So there's kingdoms and other existing countries that did not have to go through a process of declaring their independence from someone else. In the case of Liberia, which was a settlement of a series of settlements along the west coast of Africa, which later united into a commonwealth, excluding Maryland. And then what happened in 1847 was declaring its independence from those who were managing, financing, and controlling the Commonwealth of Liberia.
So technically, Liberia got her independence from the ACS, is that correct?
Basically. So we were founded as a country in 1847. We talk about independence, meaning we're no longer dependent upon this private organization that was in control of the Commonwealth.
Thank you. That leads us into today's discussion. And I'm going to put the slide on the screen. The independence and the struggle for self-determination. What's the background of the topic, Carl?
So freedom is something, I like to use the word freedom and sovereignty and liberty. I use those words interchangeably, but independence, sovereignty, freedom. These are not things that occur just once. It's a continuous struggle to maintain, especially for African people in a time period where most of the world did not recognize our humanity and our right to self-determination. In 1847, the United States of America still had, human beings in captivity, people enslaved in chattel slavery, where human beings were actual property and had deeds attached to them, could be purchased and sold like cows or any other property. So when Liberia asserted its independence, this was in the face of a period of time where this was not supposed to be happening.
Great. So let's start with slide 1 and go to slide 2.
Sure. So basically, we could do, pretty much what we did last time, where you kind of go through, just so I don't get dry throat and mouth here, and we can kind of go back and forth if you want to summarize the slide, and then I'll elaborate.
Right. A movement toward a federation of the settlement was successful. So when these were colonies around there, anyway, let me read through. All the settlements except Maryland in Liberia united in 1837 to form the Commonwealth of Liberia, governed by a board of directors delegated by the several parent societies in the United States. Thomas Buchanan was chosen governor of the new Commonwealth.
Yes. So last time we talked about all of the laws ruling the colony of Liberia. It wasn't including all the other colonies. We're specifically talking about the colony of Liberia, which was basically at Cape Mesurado. It wasn't talking about the colony of Virginia or Maryland or any of the other Mississippi and Liberia. It was specific to the colony of what they called Liberia, which was basically the settlement at Mazzarado. So the Commonwealth now is uniting all of those settlements along the coast under one umbrella, one set of laws, which basically those Commonwealth laws were an adaptation of the laws for Liberia, the settlement of Liberia. So the Commonwealth now included Bassa and in Mississippi and Virginia and all of these other places. The only settlement that was not included was Maryland.
And let's backtrack a little and see how they got there, because ACS were bringing people. So the settlement.
So we talked about many different colonization societies in part 2.
Right.
So if you want to go back and watch part 2, it is very detailed. You got the New York Colonization Society, Maryland Colonization Society, Mississippi Colonization Society, Virginia, and so on and so forth. So all of these states had their own colonization societies. They all united under one umbrella and created this Commonwealth.
How did they get to Liberia, if you can use 2 minutes for that?
What do you mean?
What I mean is, so the Maryland Colonization Society, for instance, was not part of the ACS, and they were also transporting people to Liberia through which ship? That's why I say how they got there.
Oh, so we also had in the second part 2, we talked about all of these different ships that were sailed to the coast. So that between 1819, 1820, I should say, and 1837, there were several ships chartered to bring people by various colonization societies. They all operated similarly. Mississippi in Africa, they would charter ships. Virginia, Maryland Colonization Society would charter ships. So American Colonization, ACS, was one of many different organizations, privately owned and operated organizations that would charter vessels to bring people to Liberia, to the west coast of Africa, what would later become Liberia. And these settlements were all separate. These colonies were separate and independent of each other.
Most of the time, what we hear about is Cape Mesurado and how there was some back and forth between the indigenous people, other people. Do we have any history of what went on from the start in those other colonies?
Yes. So most of those colonies, similar situations, they would sign treaties. They would cede land to them, and they would have an area to settle. Interesting, Maryland, instead of being ceded, huge tracts of land, they just allowed the Marylanders to live among them. So in Maryland, you have a situation where you would have a settlement or a home belonging to either recaptured Africans or resettled people, African Americans. And then among them in the same community would be, people, that are indigenous to the area. So they were much more intermingled and living, there wasn't as much demarcation between the homes and the vicinity of the people. Whereas in Cape Mesurado, it was clearly laid out. If you were going to enter into the settlement, you would need to, become like the people. So the rules were much more rigid, stringent from one place to another. In other areas, there was much more intermingling. And then you also had the largest population and concentration, of course, in Mesurado.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia. We are discussing the birth of the African Republic. We're going to be dealing with independence and the struggle for sovereignty. And we want to make tonight's edition as interactive as possible. So please, we're going to open the phone line very quickly so that you can join, ask questions, put your comments. Already, Achipon Duodu says, good evening, folks. Ezekiel Barman Major watching live from Dubai, UAE. Ezekiel, welcome to Focus on Liberia. Dr. Edison Pajivo said, great to see my scholar in residence called family. My nephew, Stanley Thomas, say is watching, uh, Edison already start asking questions. So tell them jokingly that anyone who has not read history is yet to be completely and properly educated. He said, indeed, that was a joke. So let's go back to our slides. So keep your comments coming. We're going to read them. We want to mix this thing up tonight, and please be a part and follow the discussion. On the second slide, we're talking about the commonwealth. This commonwealth, like the primary settlement, was merely an organized community without international status or sanction. It professed no allegiance to any known power, nor was it recognized by any power as an independent state. We're not independent yet. We still a commonwealth.
Yeah. So we're talking about, what the Commonwealth of Liberia, which is when all of these colonies united under one umbrella. And the first governor of the Commonwealth of Liberia was Thomas Buchanan, and he was also once governor of the settlement at Baffa, but for the Commonwealth of Liberia, 1837. So this is 10 years before independence. You've got Buchanan as the governor, and you also have absolutely no international status. So it's still just a settlement. It's just bigger now, and there's more people, more numbers. It's just stronger and bigger, but it's still under the thumb of ACS, and Buchanan is the governor.
The Liberian Revenue schooner, John says, while enforcing the customs collections, was seized by a British vessel and carried before the can see here, Admiralty Court at Sierra Leone. This led to controversy with the British government, in which the United States intervened to support the complaints of officers of the American Colonization Society relative to the difficulties which had arisen between the British traders and the Liberian Commonwealth.
This is important. The previous slide we were talking about, it's a community without international status.
Right.
But you've got international vessels coming to the coast and engaging in trade, and they don't want to pay taxes. They don't want to have any respect for the people that are residing there. So the Liberians owned a vessel, and it was called the John Sayers. And the British said, you don't have the authority to detain our ship and demand anything. They considered it piracy. So they seized the John Sayers and they carried it to Sierra Leone with the Liberians on board, who were trying to protect their coastline. And the abuse and disrespect that they endured was one of the catalysts that, for them to fight for independence. Now it's important that we establish something here. So you have agents for the American Colonization Society, which at this point include Joseph Jenkins Roberts, who is now the governor of Liberia, acting governor of Liberia, but he's not self-determined. He's getting all of his instruction from the United States, from the board of the American Colonization Society. So they're speaking on behalf of the Liberian people, and they're saying, hey, we have a right to do this. But the US government isn't really backing Liberia. So they're in a position, we were in a position where we were trying to negotiate for our sovereignty, but not our sovereignty, but our right to tax and control our territory. And they're saying, you don't have a right to do so. You don't have a right to defend yourself. You don't have a right to levy taxes. You don't have a right to control your borders. You also have to remember, there's still an illicit slave trade going on.
Yeah.
So you've got slaving vessels coming in. And so the schooner John Sayers, which is a ship, is trying to regulate the coast and trying to prevent people from trading in human beings, trading in any resources, really, without any type of taxation, taking advantage of the local populations. And there's no authority to defend the people living within the Liberian territory against these traders that come in.
And who made this a requirement that you should be, for you to have authority to to collect taxes, you should be a sovereign country. What was it? How things
This
were?
has been since ancient times.
Okay.
If you're not recognized by other people, if you're not recognized as a country, you can't levy taxes and no one's going to trade with you. So it is a consensual arrangement. So if other people do not recognize you as a country, you're not a country. You can send it. You and I, Dennis, can get up right now and say, you know what? We are the independent, state of, whatever we want to call ourselves in Georgia here. Nobody's going to respect that. We have to position ourselves and negotiate for that respect to be viewed as a country. And at this point, the Commonwealth was just looked at as a philanthropic, kind of like a huge reservation, for African people that had been dispelled from the United States. And who are these people trying to levy taxes against us? You have no such right,
So the revenue schooner, that was a Liberian ship, you said?
Yeah, it's called the John Sayers.
And we have, I mean, how Liberia having a ship?
Oh, Liberia had many ships. Even after this, you had people. There was a ship owned by the Dunbars. There was a ship owned. One of my favorite presidents, E.J. Roy, had a commercial ship before he became president, and he used to not only bring people, but he used to bring goods back and forth from Liberia to the United States and Sierra Leone as well, and make a stop at Sierra Leone. Sometimes make a stop at Senegambia, but Liberians were very productive in the 19th century. We'll talk about that the next episode. We'll talk about, some of the other things that occurred later on.
Yeah, I mean, even.
But yes, Liberia had its own ship. Liberia had very productive, some very productive citizens.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't want us to go there because the parent societies in the United States conveyed their rights to the Council of the Commonwealth, merely reserving ownership of a part of the land they had purchased.
So when the Liberian government reached out, or not the Liberian government, the government leadership of the Commonwealth, when they reached out to the board of directors in the United States and said, this is what's happening, we're being abused, we're being mocked and disrespected. Basically the Europeans are spitting in our faces when we try to assert ourselves. And the parent societies in the United States, which is basically the board, they're basically telling them we don't have any rights over whatever is going on in your territory. We only reserve our rights of ownership over the land we purchased. So they didn't even own the land that they were using. So they're basically telling them the only thing that we are going to involve ourselves in is the land that we purchased for you people to be on. But as far as you wanting to, trade and all of these other things, we have nothing to do with that. And it's because the ACS itself was not a country. It couldn't be recognized as such. It was just an organization. It would have had to have been the U.S. government to have stepped in, and they refused to do so because they're like, this is not our colony. It's not a part of our U.S. territory. This is private property purchased by a philanthropic group.
So this was the ultimate catalyst for the colonies to declare themselves independent, elect an assembly, and frame a constitution of their own. In Liberia, when I was growing up, people always had to beat their chest. You know who I am? I think it came from this place, right, where we want to collect taxes, we want to levy tariff, and people say, "Who are you?" So right now we are kind of beating our chest. You know who I am, because we always want to show power now, because we can't collect taxes, we can't do anything because we are not recognized as a country. And you're saying here that this was the main reason why we have to declare ourselves independent. Talk to me about that.
So it wasn't the main reason. Like last time we talked, I just said it was the ultimate catalyst, right? So when I say that, what I mean is it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. You have this oppression coming from the owners of the Commonwealth, the actual owners of the Commonwealth, which asserted that, hey, this is land we purchased. So the people living there, the people of African descent and the indigenous people, everyone living in Liberia is under the oppressive thumb of the ACS. Secondly, they're not also, in addition to that, they're not being respected by foreign vessels and foreign trade people as well. So this ultimate catalyst, this is it. It's like we don't have the respect. We can't really do anything for ourselves. The laws that were made and drawn out are being imposed upon us are restrictive. And then we're not able to raise revenue to do much. People can just come and exploit us at our ports. And there's nothing we can do about it. Liberia had no army, they had no military, they had no way to defend themselves. They had what's called a militia, few armed citizens, but it was not, there was no frontier forces at this time. They had no military.
So on August 24, 1847, this change was effected with the consent of all parties, the Republic of Liberia being duly inaugurated under the adopted constitution and the elected president installed.
I put with the consent of all parties in quotations because that's what is read. And this is where it's important for us to see history through our own eyes. That term with the consent of all parties is a very insincere and incorrect narrative. They had no choice. They could not stop Liberians at this time. The ACS did not have the authority or the power to stop the Liberians from separating themselves. There was a lot going on in the United States, so they did not have the backing of the US government to interfere. So they had to let go somewhat. So what they did was, they still tried to maintain control. They felt they could still maintain control after independence because they were going to, the ACS was going to retain its ability to still be paid for recaptured Africans and repatriated African Americans. So that's where ACS was generating a lot of money. So anytime a person was returned to their territory, the land that they purchased, because remember, this is almost an economic venture, not only philanthropy, but it's economic for them. Anytime a shipload of recaptured Africans was sent to the territory, they would negotiate, the US government would negotiate with ACS. They would give them a large sum of money and resources to repatriate these people. We talked about this the last show as well. Yeah. Most of those resources were not really used for the recaptured Africans or the people we call Congos. Most of those resources were squandered, were laundered, mismanaged. You know, there were accusations of them selling goods at Sierra Leone. There were accusations of them not using the money that the US government gave them. So in 1847, the idea that the Liberians had, Hillary Teague, Elijah Johnson, and others had was, once we become independent, we will be in full charge of the recaptured Africans, we'll be in full charge of our destiny. ACS had another idea. Like, if they want to have political independence, fine by us. But we are still, and this is a time period of grave, you know, white supremacy and all of this kind of stuff, and they still felt that they were going to be in charge of some things. The other reason I know that this, with the consent of all parties, jargon is not accurate is because they made sure that the citizenship laws were only applicable to African people, that this would also give them the protection they needed from the tyranny of white supremacy and white imperialism, that their country would be governed by their own people. So they wrote that into the Constitution.
So two things here. We see here August 24, not July 26. And also, what is all, when you say all parties, consent of all parties, you mean the ACS and the Liberians?
Yeah, that's what I just explained. So the consent of all parties, I'm saying that's fictitious. That's not really what happened. It was, they really didn't have a choice. So there was a little bit of a, yeah, we'll let them think this, but really we're going to still be in control.
Yeah.
And later on, when the Liberian government tried to negotiate with the US government and say, hey, why are you all still dealing with the ACS when we are independent? Why don't you negotiate with us? The U.S. government wrote back to the Liberian government and said, we set this up with the ACS. Your independence does not affect this relationship. And as far as we're concerned, we and the U.S. government did not at this point recognize Liberia, right? So they were still interacting with the ACS. As far as the United States government was concerned, Liberia was not a country.
Right, and I was also asking for August 24. Why not July 26, the independence?
July was when they declared independence. August 24th is when everything was effective.
Okay.
And it was inaugurated. So the inauguration under the adopted constitution occurred on August 24th. Independence, we all know, was July 26, 1847. August 24th. The reason I'm emphasizing August 24th date is a lot of people don't realize that was the duly inaugurated date. It doesn't take away from the fact that July 26th is the Declaration of Independence. But this was when all of the administrative paperwork, the Constitution, was completed and adopted.
Thank you.
And the president, Joseph Jenkins Roberts, was installed on August 24, 1847.
Correct. If you're watching and want to join the conversation, the number to call is 605-313-6004. The code is 791-403#. And for some service provider, they will charge you 1 cent per minute. The show doesn't go beyond 2 hours. And so 1 cent per minute for 120 minutes, that would be $1.20. If you can't pay that, please let me know. I can cash out you that money so that you can be part of the History Channel. Let's talk Liberian history. If I can afford, I'll ask Carl also.
Oh, man.
The colony of Maryland in Liberia, alone held continue as an independent community unrecognized by any foreign power and devoid of any character of sovereignty until April 1857, when it was received into the Republic as Maryland County.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That word "held" should be omitted from it. I apologize. So, alone continued as an independent community, unrecognized by any foreign power. So Maryland declared its independence. It declared itself independent, but it wasn't recognized. Not a single foreign country did not recognize Maryland's independence. They tried to levy taxes. They were running into some same problems that even when the Commonwealth of Liberia was established, Maryland refused to join the Commonwealth. Maryland's situation was a little bit different because the Marylanders were really intermingled. The people who settled at Maryland, they right away were intermingling with the population. So their mindset was completely different. I always say the hard-headed Marylanders, all the trouble always comes from the Marylanders. So Europeans, the French specifically, could not stand the Marylanders. And so we'll get into it a little bit later, but they did everything that they could to instigate issues between the Grebo and other ethnic groups and the settlers in Maryland. They did a whole lot of stealth warfare, propaganda, all kinds of nonsense to try to disunite the people in the Southeast because they wanted the land. But we'll get into that a little bit later. But finally, because of the pressure of not being able to be recognized or respected, Maryland agreed to join forces with the Republic of Liberia, essentially to save itself from being absorbed, by other people. And this is all occurring before the Berlin Conference, before the United States Civil War, and it's all occurring while human beings are still held in slavery in the Caribbean, North and South America.
Those three you mentioned, very important: the Berlin Conference, the U.S. Civil War, and slavery. But give me a picture. Who were these people when you said Maryland in Liberia? Were they the settlers? Were they Grebo people? Were they mixed? Who were these people, briefly?
So the settlers of Maryland were mostly recaptured Africans with a huge number of educated, repatriated African Americans. And with a very high literacy rate. Many of them were born into slavery and became literate. And then you had a huge population of Grebels and other coastal people that had been interacting with people on the coast for many centuries. So you've got the coastal Grebel people who, as we say, their eyes were open. And then you've got, so you've got this mixture of people.
Right. Right. Because it's interesting, and we're going to in the future we're going to go into Maryland all by
Mhm.
itself to really
Yeah,
see.
Maryland deserves its own emphasis, show specifically dealing with that. I agree.
And this was 1857, was 10 years after Liberia was
Yeah,
independent.
Maryland finally joined in April of 1857.
The Republic of Liberia was recognized by England in a few weeks, and on November 21, 1848, a treaty was signed with Great Britain. Soon afterwards, Liberia negotiated other treaties with France, the Hanseatic republics, Belgium, and Denmark, establishing our position as a sovereign state. Woohoo!
So recognition. This is this recognition is so incredibly important. And I will say this is before the partitioning of Africa. So the timing is good. So the Berlin Conference had not occurred yet. So Europeans had not sat and divided the continent of Africa amongst themselves. So 1848, we're being recognized by all these other countries. They haven't yet carved out Africa. And this gives us basically our humanity, our liberty. And it is a powerful tool because now we have the power to tax. We still did not have a military. So we're vulnerable, weak, but recognized.
This is important, and I want to jump ahead from here. I want to jump
Mhm.
ahead to 2022 because this is very powerful. At the Berlin Conference, people sat in Germany and divided Africa. Oh, this one for Spain, this one for Great Britain, this one for the Portuguese, and all that. Liberia is left alone because we were independent, and this is so. Fast forward today, someone, and then we also said at this time we're powerful, so we are at the same, we are at equal footing with France, with Belgium, Denmark, United, and all other sovereign countries. So if you say this to someone today, compared to other countries that were being carved out and divided among Europeans, someone would say, why is Liberia like the way it is today, over like almost 200 years later? Why?
We didn't have a foreign country to exploit, to enslave, and to loot and rob. We didn't have a slave nation to extract resources from. We didn't commit mass genocide against our population. We didn't do any of the things that these European countries did to become wealthy and powerful.
But Ghana, Nigeria, Ivory Coast didn't have to do any of that as
Of
well.
course, they did those things
How?
because Ghana, Nigeria, and Ivory Coast were not African states. These were extensions of European states. So Ghana, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, these were European countries. And the people there were the property of the Europeans along with their land. So when you partition something, it becomes your property and everything in it becomes your property. So this is the second wave of slavery. I always tell people, they go, oh, I look at Abidjan. Abidjan was built with slave labor. All of the roads, all of the ports, they were not free to go. They were not compensated. They were built by enslaved Ivorian people. The resources and the infrastructure was built for the benefit of the people extracting resources. The railroads, the highways, the buildings were built for the benefit of those extracting those resources, not for the people that existed there.
If we were to replay, I just want you to state again what you just said because this is powerful. I've never thought of it that way. That okay, we're in the business of comparing ourselves with these countries. You were saying the reason Liberia is the way it is today is because we did not kill people to take their resources. And you were saying even our neighboring countries, they were properties of the Europeans. So whatever evil was done to other countries to benefit these European powers, these other African countries were doing the same because they were
The
all
evil was done right on the continent.
yeah,
So if you take over Ghana,
right.
you get the gold, you get the human labor resources. I mean, look at what they did in Belgian Congo. The entire country, including the human beings,
Right.
were the property of King Leopold. And they were not free to live their lives. The entire Congo was enslaved. And if you didn't work, they amputated you. They cut your hands and feet off. The Germans went into Namibia and literally carried hundreds of thousands of people into the desert and slaughtered them so that they could take their land. In Ivory Coast, they had forced labor. The French literally enslaved Ivory Coast, used them for agricultural purposes, used them to extract not only agriculture but ivory, use them to dig gold, use them to build French wealth. So Ivory Coast became a plantation, and any infrastructure that was developed in Ivory Coast was for the benefit of the parent country, the owners of the reason Africa was divided was not for the benefit of African people, but for the benefit of those dividing it.
Mm. So now, fast forward 1990, 1995, people are saying, oh, Liberians were being better off if we were colonized. I hear people say that.
They don't know what they're saying. They don't understand history. They don't understand the world. I like to do simple things like say, land sovereignty. And I don't want to get off on a tangent. But
Yeah, it's necessary.
we in Liberia are basically poor landowners. We still own all of 100% of Liberia belongs to Liberian people. This is powerful. I am Mono. I'm from Nimba. There's Mono people on both sides of the St. John River. The people across the river don't own land. The people on our side own land. The part of Maryland that went to the front, what used to be Maryland County or the Republic of Maryland, the part that the French took from Liberia, are those Grebo people better off than the Grebo people on the Liberian side? The answer is no. Absolutely not. And in fact, if not for Sekou Touré, Guinea would be pretty bad off. You see Pele people in Guinea, you see Mono people in Guinea, are they better off than the Pele and Mono people in Liberia? The answer is absolutely not. Are the Loma people in Guinea better off than the Loma people in Liberia? The answer is no. Are the Vai people in Sierra Leone better off than the Vai people in Liberia? What kind of thinking is that? These people come to Liberia for opportunities, even in our current state, because infrastructure and all of these things were not built for the benefit of the masses. They're built for the benefit of those who are benefiting from the resources. And so most of those people are landless and powerless. And they come to Liberia for liberty. They come to Liberia as a place of hope. Because even in their independence from these European countries, they're still under their thumbs economically. And the idea that access to anything and the access to freedom and self-determination is still non-existent. You still see the streams. You go to Monrovia today, wake up, y'all in Liberia, wake up tomorrow morning and see how many Guinea Pele people are in the streets of Monrovia selling bitter cola. How many people leave Ivory Coast to come to Liberia to hunt because they will get shot and killed if they try to hunt on their ancestral land in Ivory Coast because it belongs to some rich French landowner. Those massive agricultural plantations that you see in Ivory Coast, they don't belong to Ivorians. They belong to French. And these French people hire people from other French nations like Burkina Faso to come work on their plantations because it's theirs. It doesn't belong to the people of Ivory Coast.
back to our slide. The United States recognized the Republic of Liberia on September 23. Why they chose my birthday? 1862, when the American Minister to England, Charles F. Adams, was empowered to conclude a treaty of commerce and navigation with the Republic of Liberia. The treaty was signed by Adams and the President of Liberia on October 25, 1862. From 1847 all the way to 1862, before we call them what? Traditional allies recognize us.
Yeah, so basically, it took the United States until 1862 to recognize, for the reasons stated here. You had, Charles F. Adams. The United States was really weak at this point in history. They had a civil war boiling. They had wars besides the Civil War. They had wars with some indigenous populations. They had a lot of things going on. The United States of America was not a superpower at this point in history. And in order to be able to negotiate and be able to trade, Adams worked with the U.S. government, U.S. Congress, to recognize Liberia finally. Because U.S. trading vessels were not allowed to trade with Liberia because they didn't recognize Liberia. That's also very important to note, that at that point, before 1862, American ships could not come to Liberia and just trade because they didn't recognize it as a country. So the British and other countries had more advantage trading with Liberia. We were using British currency. So we had this, really tight, close-knit relationship with England at this point in history, not the United States.
Yeah.
There was a lot of resentment and regret over us trying to assert our independence. And it was also giving a lot of enslaved Africans in the United States, people who were enslaved, and also freed Blacks who were working under the thumbs of white people in the North. It was serving as a beacon of hope. Reason to escape slavery. You could go back to Africa. You could go to Liberia. You could be self-determinant. So this really angered a lot of powerful Americans. The audacity of these people to stand up and try to have their own modern republic, and it's serving as a means to instigate our property, our slaves, against the idea of slavery.
And we gotta say, with Dennis, let process what Carl just explained. So when you explain about our independence and sovereignty comparing to other West African countries, especially, Priscilla wants us to wait a minute so that she can process that, because that is very, very profound. So, Priscilla, indeed, we will allow you to process that as we take a short break.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Ja.
Welcome back to Focus on Liberia. A few comments here before we proceed. Isaac Harris say, "I'm glad you are explaining these things. Most Liberians don't know how much we are blessed. At least we own our own. Not many other African countries are that way." Henry Last, and the US and Europe became advanced and wealthy due to free labor, chattel slavery, wealth they are enjoying to date. Edison Pajibo, that's Dr. Edison Pajibo, we call him Dr. Paje. The African settlements that were formed during partition of Africa were extension of the mother country for the exploitation of the natural resources for the new kind of trade called the legitimate trade. So they built administrative structures and railways to export those resources to their homeland. For example, the governor of Sierra Leone, Charles McCarthy, was sent to Ghana to fight for the natives. Those are a few of the comments. Keep your comments coming. And we also have our phone number set up here, 605-313-6004. The code is 791-403. Call to join the conversation. This is interactive, and there we go. So America, of all the days in the world, they chose my birthday to recognize Liberia. That is profound. I think that should be the highlight of the day. This is Liberia, Cole.
Yeah, so this is a map, not of the whole Liberian territory. This is another thing that I've noticed that people get confused about. So you've got the settlement, which is under the control of the Liberian state, which is mainly coastal, and then up the St. Paul River. And then Maryland went inland a little bit. But this is not the entire territory of Liberia, meaning that within the Liberian territory is this massive unexplored area, which is inhabited by people who have their own autonomous nations within the Liberian territory. People who were existing and had their own kings, what we like to call chiefs, or even had, especially in parts of the southeastern part of Liberia, you had, clans-based societies. In the north and central part of Liberia, you had actual countries, under a ruler. So you had independent peoples living within the territory who had autonomy over themselves. This is all before the partitioning of Africa. So Liberia only had command and control over the coast. This is important. That's the distinction. So the land, the reason this unexplored part of this area was still considered part of Liberian territory is because the tradition at the time was for your land to extend all the way to the headwaters of the rivers. The reason is, if you don't control the source of the fresh water that comes into your territory, how sovereign are you? If someone else controls that, they can cut the water off and build a dam. You won't have any more St. Paul River. You won't have any more St. John River. You can cut off the Kavala. So the tradition of statehood is that countries should control the headwaters of the rivers. And this is why Liberia's territory extended so far inland. It was to the source water of all the rivers.
I was in Bosso in Guinea, and I saw the source of the St. John River. That is now is in Guinea. So
yes,
you can literally jump over it.
The source water, even of the Mississippi River, I've walked across it many times as a child. All the source headwaters of rivers are always small, but you want to always, they should be within. So the reason the United States boundary with Canada starts at the source water of the Mississippi River is for the exact same reason. Canada, the headwaters of the Mississippi River could not be in Canada, because Canada could essentially then stop the Mississippi from flowing if they had a conflict with the United States.
Right. So the reason I brought that up is right now the source of the St. John River is no longer in Liberia.
The source of the St. Paul River is no longer in Liberia. And that occurred by some pretty wicked, evil manipulation and warfare and all kinds of things that were done to us. But we'll go to the next slide.
Yes, and before we go there, because this is this a security concern, right?
Of course.
We're talking about everyday electricity in Liberia, right? The St. Paul is somewhere. Someone can cut that off and we have no electricity.
Of course. So this happened before. Let's go on with the slides. We'll get to it.
Yeah.
We're jumping ahead.
I know, because I can't wait.
So the next slide again illustrates this in a little better detail. It shows all the coastal settlements. I want you to take a look at the southeast, how far Maryland extended into what is now Ivory Coast.
Yeah. San Pedro, all that thing that for us.
It used to be.
Yeah.
When they talk about, oh, the people executed the Gribble chiefs, blah, 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 it has a lot to do with why that place is in Ivory Coast today. Because they were instigating these people against the Liberian state with the ultimate goal of taking all of the land. And they used the greed of Liberian people against one another. The fight these people will give you power, and not realizing that the French wanted their land more than the Liberians did. The Liberians just wanted to be left the heck alone. So they sat there and fought for the French, and then the French turned around and told them, hey, we not only do we own your land, but we own you too. Thank you for fighting the Liberians for us, basically.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, after the Berlin Conference, the autonomy was no longer an option for African people. So you fighting Liberia, you have two options. You either become Liberian or you become a subject of the French. They didn't understand that the world had changed.
Oh, Cody, there's trouble with your audio right there.
Oh.
So let's do that again. So get that fixed. You can get in and come back as we played the music from my hometown, the flute. Welcome back to Focus on Liberia. This is the Liberian History Channel. My name is Dennis Jai, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. Tonight, we are dealing with independence and the struggle to remain sovereign, that is the country of Liberia. And my guest here is Carl Famule, a historian, also FOL, public policy analyst. And again, few comments here as we go along. This one from Amadou say, what is the difference between declaring independence and gaining independence? Is there any effect of gaining an independence from and by an organization other than a country? Call as we get by, there's a question here from Amadou. What is the difference between declaring independence and gaining independence? And also Achepon Duodu says, is there any effect of gaining independence from by an organization other than a country?
He's asking what's the difference between declaring independence and gaining independence.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about what it took to be recognized as a country. Right. So I guess if his question is, if Maryland declared it was independent, but it wasn't recognized, whereas Liberia declared its independence and was recognized by other countries and therefore was truly independent. That's the difference. I mean, you and your girlfriend can sit down and say y'all married, but if it's not recognized by any authority, it's not a marriage.
Yeah. Oh, I like that.
And then the other question was what?
It was along the same line.
Mm-hmm.
That was it was along the same line. Let's go back to our map here.
So this basically just talks about what we've been going over. So this is the original shape of Liberia all the way to the headwaters. I think only part of Nimba and Lofa even reach up this close to this, being this high up. The rest of it has been encroached upon by both the French and the British, not only in the north, but also on our coast. We used to own all the way to Sherboro. Now it's all the way to the Mono River. Part of the Vi Kingdom was divided between Sierra Leone and Liberia. In fact, Sierra Leone tried to take the entire Vi Kingdom all the way to Cape Mount, and King Massaquoi fought all he could. He ended up having to turn to the Liberians to assist him in keeping the British back through all kinds of not only physical altercations, but also through diplomatic negotiations as well. One of the things that the Liberian people did masterfully, they were so articulate and conscious of international law that they were able to successfully argue in their own defense and in defense of their sovereign boundaries on numerous occasions, outsmart and out-debate both the British and the French in international court. This is something that needs the attention of all Liberians. Was extremely powerful at this point in history. We had such legal minds that were able to stand up to imperialists, to these extreme white supremacists who did not even want to recognize our humanity before you say our sovereignty. And in that 19th century time period, we had such brilliant minds that were able to stand up and articulate and assert themselves, not only their humanity, but their right to self-determination. Those diplomatic battles, that legal battles, along with physical fights over land. Usually the Europeans fought Liberians through surrogates, through using our own citizens, our own people within our sovereign territory against us. So used us against ourselves, basically.
Oh, wow. So we talked about the Berlin Conference, and we talked about our independence. So at the time of the Berlin Conference, what was Liberia's borders like? Because why was the part of Liberia that was not really explored by Liberians or in control, why was it not taken by, I know the French and the British took part of it.
Well, that's not really, so this map you're looking at, if you can go back to the map, this is what Liberia still looked like after the Berlin Conference.
Yeah.
So the encroachment on Liberian territory began after the Berlin Conference.
Right.
And one of the reasons for the encroachment was that before the Berlin Conference, all of the land around Liberia was considered, it was just Africa, right? So these people were still autonomous. So if one Grebo chief along the Kavala River or the San Pedro River decided to fight another group on the other side of the river, it wasn't somebody else's territory as far as it wasn't European territory. But once the French owned a certain part of territory that wasn't belonging to Liberia, and our indigenous people decided to fight their traditional wars or whatever they were doing, the French would then say, this is an invasion of Liberians into French territory. These were the reasons that they used in court, in international court, to argue for why they should be able to seize control of the Liberian hinterland. They said the Liberian government did not have the power or the resources to control or subdue its native population. And since they were not able to do so, the French and the British said they were going to do so for them. And one of the reasons for it is they would say, these people within your territory are entering our territory for purposes of war. Well-documented arguments that they would make. So it put Liberia in a position where they now needed to have a military to try to get some control over their own hinterland. So it became an issue of, if the Liberians don't control the interior, if we don't control it, the French or the British will.
And
because we never, my ancestors in Nimba, we were trading with the Liberians on the coast, but they didn't have any control over what we were doing. So if my great-great-grandfather, decided that he was going to go to war with some Pele people. I mean, up until the early 20th century, we're still fighting wars. That's why Suakoko had to seek the assistance of the Liberians. That's why there's such a place called Buze Quarters, because there'd be wars in the hinterland and they come down to the coast to seek refuge or to seek protection from their enemies. So we had a lot of stuff going on. So some of those things crossed the line beyond the Liberian territory, because the artificial boundaries that were created at the Berlin Conference have absolutely nothing to do with us. We're not the ones who said this is now French territory, this is now Liberian territory. As far as we're concerned, it's Africa, this is our people. We can go over there and beat them, and we've been doing for generations.
Right. And these were the same ethnic groups, so it was like they didn't.
Or even other ethnic groups. It's not necessarily the same ethnic group. Sometimes the same, sometimes different. I mean, if the Loma people want to go to war with the Soso people, and it happens to be that the Soso people are in the French territory, and the Loma people are in the Liberian territory, the French will say, hey, your people are entering our territory for purposes of war. This is an invasion from a foreign country into our country, into our territory.
And you were talking about Liberians being lawyers and pleading their case and challenging imperialists and colonialists, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we were in areas like, and I think our West African neighbors recognize that even till today. That's why when we were there as refugees, they said never allow a Liberian to explain. They know law, they're going to win you. So by the time they got you, they started beating you, they want to take you to jail. They said, don't give them a chance to explain. They're going to convince you. So I think it came from there.
Probably, yeah. We had some very, very powerful legal minds.
We've been mentioning the Berlin Conference. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, also known as the Congo Conference or West Africa Conference, regulated European colonization and trade in Africa during the new imperialism period and coincided with Germany's sudden emergence as an imperial power.
Yes. So Germany is becoming powerful. Germany has now gained a bunch of wealth from their genocide that they committed in Southern Africa, Namibia specifically. And so Germany now becomes extremely wealthy because of their mass land grab and enslavement of Namibia. And they also have a seat at the table. They're causing all kinds of havoc. Germany at one point wanted to take over parts of West Africa, but this is where they got together and carved out West Africa, East Africa, Central Africa. They carved out the entire continent. And they did so without regard to existing empires. They did so without regard to existing people. This is around the time that the late, great Samori Toure decided to resist. He was one of the few African rulers, leaders, generals who understood what was happening. He saw the writing on the wall. He saw what was coming. And so Samori Toure felt that the only way to save West Africa from imperialism, the imperialism of the French, was to unite everyone under one religion and under one language. So Samori Toure proceeded to himself become almost like a conquering lion or an imperialist and absorb other African groups. So you have the great Mandingo expansion of the 19th century. And I do have to mention, a lot of times I speak to young people and they get things confused. When we say 19th century, we're talking about the 1800s, not the 1900s. So the great Mandingo expansion of the 19th century, which is the late 1800s during that Berlin conference, Samori Toure had what's called the Woselu Empire, or they also call it the Mandinka Empire. He literally spread the language and the culture among other people, encouraging people to convert to Islam. It was almost twofold. There was a resistance against imperialism and colonialism, and it was also a jihad. It was a holy war. He was deeply religious. He promoted people who learned the Quran, who learned to read and write the Quran. He promoted those people and to positions of general. So if you were a slave or a servant and you became a devout Muslim, he would encourage, he would promote you. The slaves of the Mandingo people were automatically, considered Mandingo if they converted to Islam. They could adopt the language and the culture. So a good number of the Mandingo people in West Africa were not really, didn't consider themselves, their ancestors didn't consider themselves Mandingo until Samori Toure spread the faith and spread the language. And he was actually genius for doing so. Had he succeeded, many of us would be Mandingo today. If he had succeeded, we would have probably had an Islamic state in West Africa today, but he did not succeed. The French, again, employed their age-old tactic, which is using other Africans to fight other Africans on like proxy war. So they used the enemies of the Mandinka to fight Samori Toure, and it was actually other Africans fighting on behalf of the French imperialists that put a stop to Samori Toure's advance and destroyed his empire and eventually conquered his efforts. All of that was born out of this Berlin Conference.
Before the Berlin Conference, this was Africa.
Yeah. So this is not showing the Liberian territory, but really where the Liberians were settled, and where these were known places. French control, Arab control. You see Ethiopia up there, Madagascar. Where they had settlements, Southern Africa. You see parts of Namibia, all these areas. This is 1880, before the conference partitioned Africa. And we all know what Africa looked like afterwards. That's the common map that we see today, because the present countries, all they did was follow whatever, boundary delineation was determined in 1880.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let's go back to our comments here. The one from Duodu say, is there any effect of Guinea and independence from a country or from an organization? I think it's want to say like the is independent from ACS or independent from Great Britain, things like that. He said, what's the impact?
I mean, if you weren't actually owned by a country, you just have a bunch of private citizens that own land, and you were settled there. It's a little bit easier to break away. You don't have to have the military resistance that a lot of people had to have to separate themselves from imperialism. Like the American Revolution against the British wasn't a flat out war. But if you have, like in our case, where you had a group of philanthropists who still hung around after independence, it wasn't a bloody, violent separation.
Yeah, that's true. One more question here,
Mm-hmm.
and people, Humphrey Jabatese, is Liberia practically independent? Not sure yet. I know we discussed what independence is from the beginning. What will you say to Jabate?
We're not economically independent. We're not educationally independent, which is very dangerous. To have other people educating you and your children and determining your curriculum is extremely dangerous for any country. So we do have a lot of work to do. I always say to, when I lecture, I always say, Liberia hasn't been attained yet. It's still a work in progress. We haven't achieved Liberia yet, but we are sovereign. We have land sovereignty. No one has taken what we have. What we have remaining with us is for us. So we're still in a good position to be able to achieve what Liberia was intended to be. If we can get our acts together. Liberia is extremely wealthy. We own all of it. If we get our acts together, there is enough for everybody born under our flag to enjoy a prosperous life and to live among the best of the people in the world. The resources we have, if used for our benefit, the benefit of our own children, our own citizens, it's enough with our own sweat and hard work and innovation to create a very prosperous, wealthy, and productive environment for everyone born under the flag.
Let me read two more comments, and if there's nobody on the phone line, then we can wrap up. Stanley Thomas Sewan, it is generally assumed that ACS was set up by the American government. How accurate is that, and is there any reference to the ACS Foundation that shows the US government's involvement? Why most of our history only mention ACS and not the other colonization societies?
So when you read something and you learn something, you can't make a statement like why most of our history. You don't know most of our history. So you can't say why most of our history. All of the colonization societies are mentioned in history. It's just about how deep have you gone into history to understand it. History isn't limited to what you know. So we have to be careful. I hear people saying, this is not taught in history, or this isn't in history books. It is in history books, and it is written, and it is well documented. And the history of ACS formation, we discussed that in part 1 of this series that we're doing. The very first one we talked in great detail. ACS wasn't created by the US government. The US government worked with ACS. It was a collaboration, a cooperation between ACS and the Liberian government. I'm sorry, in the American government. So the American government had a repatriation of recaptured Africans, and ACS and some missionary groups worked with the US government to repatriate recaptured Africans. ACS's emphasis was freed African Americans. The US government was trying to rid itself of recaptured Africans.
Dave just says, sadly, he, Minister Morim Toure, did not convert them to an African religion, but to a foreign religion.
Yeah, I mean, Islam is so old in Africa, and it is in fact an Asian Arab, religion with a lot of African influence. In all fairness, even the way that Muslims pray is older than Islam and existed in Africa. The process of bowing to the East is a practice that existed in Africa long before Islam. So Islam has a lot of African influence from traditional African spirituality, if you'd like to admit it or not. I'm talking about a lot of the rituals and the cultures. But yes, the religion itself was born of Asian culture and is dominantly an Arabic cultural religion with quite a significant amount of African influence, especially the way it's practiced in Africa.
C. Ilaxe, what is the probability of Maryland regaining her sovereignty? I think C is talking about secession. C, is that what you mean?
Yeah, so I don't think Marylanders want to break away from Liberia. I think right now that Lofa want to break away from Liberia.
With what? With Samuka?
And Nimba would join them.
Henry Lassie, interestingly, though Africa is free, it still lives by those borders it didn't create.
Yeah. So I always make this joke that the post-colonial African nations are essentially their governments, their borders, everything were created for the most part. I mean, there's some that have broken away, but for the most part, were created by Europeans and for their benefit. So their governments operate for the benefit of the former colonial masters and not for their citizens.
Henry Lassie, interestingly though, I read that. Ahmed K. Salif, what can we modern African leaders do today to extricate ourselves from the intractable legacies of colonialism and coloniality? Ahmed can talk small.
Big English, all the English speak from you. So Liberia, in and of itself, before even these independence, even before the Berlin Conference conquered Africa, Liberia is always supposed to have been that bright lone star on the coast of Africa, shining as a beacon of hope for all African people to unite as one. That's the purpose of Liberia, is to become the beacon of hope for Pan-Africanism and oneness of African people. So Liberia has to get its act together. We have a very big mandate that's so much bigger than we can imagine, and we need to rise to the occasion and become what we were intended to be. We're capable of doing so. History has directed us and positioned us to do so. And until Liberia, I say this to all my African friends, until Liberia is attained, none of us will be free. The whole purpose of us has always been to set that example. So we do have to step up and do what's necessary to carry Africa forward. And even in our broken, dejected state, we are still very much progressive in how we do things and how we think, the kind of thinkers we produce. First woman elected head of state on the continent. We do so many things that are leaps and bounds ahead of our counterparts in other countries. Even in our broken, dejected state, we are a beacon of hope.
And first footballer elected head of state too. You want to add that? All right. Hana Keita say interesting discussion. See, I like say Carl is right. Our history is not told in a single history book. This interview is very revealing and educational. Dr. Edison Paji will say Carl is such an asset. This show should not be held 11 p.m. in Liberia. Dennis, you and Carl think of this. Yes, Dr. Pajibo, we are thinking about that. This show needs sponsorship so that we can be able to do it at a time that because we all work, and so when we are free on a Saturday, but we can think about that. Haruna Keita again. Carl formula great response regarding Islam and African relationship. Dave just said the answer is Afrocentrism. And Carl, when you were talking about Liberia has that beacon of hope, the purpose that unless Liberia gets its act together, Liberia is free and assume that role that in Africa will not be free. And so I was talking with someone who would say, oh, I wanted to do this, but you say focus on Liberia. So it's all Liberia. So I couldn't invite guests from other countries. So I said, go back to the original meaning of Liberia. Why was Liberia established? So think of Liberia.
So it's powerful. Our initial preamble says Liberia is an asylum for the displaced people of children of Africa.
Yeah.
And it was established as an asylum, a safe space for African people. And with the idea that one star on our flag is supposed to be that beacon of hope, that beacon of light for the rest of the continent of Africa to aspire towards. You're talking about a place that was established during the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, was still occurring unlawfully, they say, but it was still in process. And here you have this abolitionist nation standing up and fighting for its own existence and its right to exist. Liberia has been sabotaged similarly to Haiti for many reasons, mainly because it represents everything that contradicts the cause of the European expansion and conquest of Africa.
Right.
The excuse that the Europeans used for conquering Africa was that Africans were not capable of self-governance. And the Liberian state was a slap in the face to their false ideology. Because here you had Africans in a modern state, self-determinant, and able to articulate themselves and argue successfully in international court. This was an affront to white imperialism, European imperialism in Africa. So for many reasons, they had to fight and create tension and contention and try to instigate, conflicts within our borders in order to maintain their position of control. And we should keep conscious of that as we talk about tribalism. We should be conscious of that as we talk about, Congo, all this kind of these labels and these things that we use as reasons to not respect ourselves as a country. These things are not our doing. They are things that were exacerbated by outside forces for the purpose of breaking us down so that we could be controlled and exploited. There's no way for us to become anything better than what we are if we continue talking of ourselves and defining ourselves the way that we do.
Thank you. And that's what I told the person when we say focus on Liberia, go back and focus on that original intent for the establishment of Liberia. Has that beacon of hope? Has that oasis in Africa? And that's why we always play the song at the end of our broadcast that says we are all Liberians. And really, we should think about that every day. That, as you said, with all the labels, country, Congo, Peleman, Gribbleman, yes, we have diversities, but that big picture that we are all Liberians should be able to drive us so that we can each contribute to the real meaning of
Exactly.
what we call Liberia. Priscilla say, thanks for explaining the August 24 and July 26 part call. Yes, that was a good one. Isaac say, please let us know how to contribute. A lot of our history needs to be passed down to the younger generation. The younger generation Liberians are so lost. Current generation always think of the one coming as being lost or not doing right. And so, Harris, in fact, as I said at the beginning, we are getting on the radio in Liberia. It requires resources, and we want to have all our shows broadcast on the radio in Liberia. In fact, we have the slot of doing that every day, but it costs money to be on the radio in Liberia. And so if you look at the bottom of we have our donation, Cash App and all that, or you can call and see how you can contribute. Haruna also say, Carl, do you think the current Pan-African movement gives credit to William V.S. Tubman's contribution to the organization and Liberia as a whole, as they gave Ghana and their first president? That Tubman thing, let me see this one before you come to Tubman. You emphasize that Samori Touré influenced many West Africans to convert to Islam and Mandingo. This happened before Emperor Sundiata Keita or after? And what are some of the contributions of Sundiata Keita during the colonial era?
Sundiata Keita lived 900 years ago, almost 1,000 years ago. So we're talking about very ancient Mandinka man who was not Muslim, practiced a traditional Mandinka religion. We're talking about Sundiata Keita lived almost 1,000 years ago. Samori Touré lived a little over 120, 130 years ago. So there's no generational connection between the two. Sundiata is an ancient Mandinka ancestor. And Samori Touré is just the great-grandfather of Sekou Touré. So we're talking about very recent times in history. One of the things that I've noticed about the way that we read history too is that we have a very big disconnect in the timeline of historical events. The last episode that we did, I had someone ask a question about why Mansa Musa Kankan did not resist colonialism. It's a similar misplacement of timeline of history. Mansa Musa Kankan existed hundreds of 500 years ago. So there was no colonialism 500 years ago. He was also an ancient ancestor of West African people. The timeline of history is extremely important or we'll be confused. But yes, Sundiata Keita was not Muslim. He was Mandinka. The two things are not synonymous. There were early Mandinka kings that converted to Islam. All Mandingo people were not Muslim really until much later. It was Samori Touré that encouraged all Mandinka people to become Muslim. And it was Samori Touré who also basically conquered and expanded the Mandinka language and empire. So a lot of people became Mandinka and became Muslim in the late 19th century. The number of Mandinka people increased, not because they had more babies, but because they won more wars, because of Samori Touré's conquest and his attempt to save us from imperialism through the expansion of one language and one religion.
Thank you. And on the Tubman question?
And as far as the Tubman question is concerned, your grandeur, your recognition, your respect begins at home. And we Liberians have been taught so much to hate everything about ourselves that we ourselves condemn. I've seen Liberians sitting in a gathering with other Africans who have been taught in their countries to respect Tubman. And as soon as Tubman's name is brought up, or any Liberian's name is brought up, you hear Liberians condemning the person, and the other Africans kind of are taken aback. We are taught to hate everything about Liberia, and it's because we don't create or develop our own curriculums. It's not Liberian centric. Everything that we're taught in school and on the streets or in our homes about Liberia, for whatever reason, is extremely negative and inaccurate. Inaccurate. Was Tubman a dictator? Absolutely. Was Tubman a brilliant, innovative Africanist who was able to hold the country together? Absolutely. Was he innovative? Did he know how to negotiate with the Western world for our position and our sovereignty and our resources management and all of these things? Was he creative and innovative in helping other African nations achieve independence? Absolutely. Was he a dictator who jailed his opponents? Absolutely. History is not a single narrative. It is a complex things, and many things can be true about one person at the same time. A lot of great people did bad things, but you do not throw the baby out with the bathwater. You have to tell the complete story. Tubman was extremely influential in the independence movement in Africa. And many of the first presidents of many of African countries emulated Tubman and followed his example and his lead. The dignity in which he conducted himself, the way he held his head up when he spoke, the audacity he had during a period of time when America was still in deep segregation and African people couldn't even drink from the same drinking fountain, and Black people, I should say, as white people. People couldn't even enter buildings through the same doors in the United States. He went and sat face to face with US presidents, and had that much dignity and respect for himself. He did things that he was the first to do many things that others couldn't do. So we have to respect that position. He was the trailblazer. He opened the door for other African people to have diplomacy. You know how many Liberians were the first to do so many things in the world? And we throw that away so we can hang on to our country Congo narrative, which is absurd. We don't even teach our children, about Diderot Twe running for president, about Diderot Twe or Wolo going to Harvard. We don't teach our children about Angie Brooks, the Grebo Gola woman who was, powerful in the United Nations, who was a lawyer, who was the attorney general for the country, who did all these great things, who refused to get on a bus in the United States to go to school and chose to walk because she refused to ride in the back of the bus because she was a Liberian and she came from somewhere where she was self-determined and respected. This native girl who we call Angie Brooks, that was her legacy in America, refusing to get on a bus, to give her money to public transportation and be treated like less than other people. She chose to walk to school every day. These are the people we come from. This is our legacy. This is what we should be teaching our children, to build their self-esteem. Because if they don't know these things, they feel that Liberia is trash. They will throw dirt in the streets. They will treat themselves like trash. They will forge their education. They will forge their degrees because they will not respect themselves enough to achieve anything. Because we're inadvertently telling our children that nothing has been achieved, that you've done nothing. And so when you listen to the next generation talk, what do they say? Since 1822, it's been like this. And that is a lie. That's a lie. That's a lie we tell people to excuse mediocrity. That's the lie we tell our children to stop them from reaching their potential. We have to stop this. We have to tell the truth. So the goal of this History Channel is to resurrect the memory of the people who came before us, so that we can stand on their shoulders again and continue this struggle to make Liberia what it's supposed to be.
Thank you so much, Carl. On that note, we want to say thank you again for yet another edition of the History Channel. We want to thank our viewers for staying here with us, always right here on Focus on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia.
All right. Thank you all so much. It's been a great show.
And we always end with our song that says, we are all Liberians. Whether you believe that the country has been like this since 1847, or we can boast of the people that came before us and the work they did so that we can proudly stand on their shoulders. Or you believe that Dennis Jai is a great Liberian, and this is a guy that you should talk about everywhere you go, and kind of spread the good works that we are doing here. Or you want to say Liberia is a bad country and everything about Liberia is bad, and the people that are 40 years old and older, they all spoil the country, and we are just bad and bad and bad. Until then, we are all Liberians, and that's the message. Good night, and God bless you. Happy Easter.
We are Liberia. Liberia is our home. Liberia people. Liberia.